Now, post-auction review, we're going to be reviewing an auction that just took place here in Venango County, Pennsylvania, and this is an upset auction. Pennsylvania is kind of a unique state in terms of how it operates and how it conducts its tax sales. They hold a number of different types of sales. Pennsylvania is classified as a tax deed state, but it offers 4 types of tax deed auctions, starting with the upset auction, then a private auction, then a judicial auction, and then the repository sale is essentially what follows that. And so the other thing that's interesting about Pennsylvania is they have a specific office called the tax claim office that handles all of their tax sale properties, except for in a couple of different places here. But it's the series of different sales they do that's unique to any other state. I don't think there's any other state that holds a series of sales quite like this. And it's kind of interesting because the opportunities vary at different points here throughout the process here. Number one, upset sale. So when they first conduct the upset sale, you have full ownership of the property, you can buy it, but things like mortgages are still attached to the property. It hasn't actually been through a judicial foreclosure yet. And so it is an auction to buy the property. And certainly there are properties that aren't going to have mortgages or liens, or that, maybe those mortgages or liens are not a problem. There's probably lots of properties that don't have mortgages or liens that may come up in the upset sale, and they could be good deals. But yeah, anything that's left over from there goes to the private sale. And that's kind of like an over-the-counter version of the upset sale. And so the property not purchased at that tax sale, it still has mortgages and things that are attached to it in both the upset sale and in the private sale. Those mortgages don't come off until the third sale, which is the judicial sale, and that's where an actual judicial foreclosure takes place. And that's also when properties are free and clear of any of the liens or mortgages that are assigned to them. So it's not until that third sale that we actually get a judicial foreclosure that takes place and that wipes out other attachments or things that are other liens the property may have.
Yeah, exactly. So, when we're talking about the upset sale, the private sale, we need to make sure that we do our due diligence on those auctions. There still could be great opportunity. In fact, we're going to be looking at an upset sale today. And so I would say that probably less than 10% of the properties that we research have mortgages. So really what we're going to become common with is any type of government liens or something that could stick to the property, which we're still going to need to research. So it's a little bit similar to maybe like a bank sale, except for if there is no bank note against it, you're going to be in a good position. But once we get to that judicial sale, in fact, even most liens will be eliminated from the property. So unlike other states, when it goes to the judicial sale, even a lot of the city liens can get wiped out in many counties. Now, what the repository sale is these are the properties that don't sell in the judicial sale. And see, these are really kind of the over-the-counter properties. Now, some of them may be sold in an auction and others will be sold over the counter directly from the county.
Yeah, and so that basically kind of describes how Pennsylvania operates as a whole. What we're going to be looking at here today, I think, is this is an upset sale we're going to look at?
Yeah, we're going to be looking at an upset sale, and I did a few searches on them, and I actually didn't find a whole lot of mortgages against any of these properties. But I think that there really is probably a pretty good opportunity within here. As long as we're able to do our research, we still own the property. You can still take it through quital. You can still sell it as is. It's just that extra level of due diligence. And so if you're willing to do that, these could still be great properties that are going to be picked up, most of these at minimum bid amounts. Now, the county that we're going to be looking at is Venango County. And, they're a little bit more rural county, but it was just the first list. And I started looking at some properties. I thought, well, let's just go through and see what sold at the auction that day. Now, one thing that we do like to do is to kind of get a look at the counties and look at what the real estate is currently on the market versus what the real estate is selling at. And so here within Venango County, we can see that there's 135 properties, and we're going to go check the last year worth of sold properties.
And have you separated them into lots and improvements yet?
No, because we're going to be looking at a combination of homes and land.
Interesting.
But there's 513 properties total that sold within the county over the last year. And then if we look at the for sale, there's about 135 properties currently on the market.
Yeah, that's a pretty good market.
Yeah, so even though it's a smaller area, more rural area, there's still a lot of property that are selling. within this particular market. So here is the upset sell I was looking at, and it was actually just last year's sell. They haven't held it this year, and this is part of the reason we're talking about it now, is that they'll start doing some of their upset sells. But we'll look through a few of the different properties.
Well,
Now,
and I think it's worth stating too that I think it's easy to look at something like an upset sale and say, because the property hasn't gone through some kind of foreclosure yet, that it's a problem. But in a lot of ways, this is the first opportunity you get to bid on these properties, and so a lot of the best deals are going to end up getting picked up here early on in the sale. And Steve's right in that so many of these properties are not going to have any kind of liens against them, and that's why it doesn't really matter if it's an upset sale. They're just as good of an opportunity in the upset sale as they would be in the judicial sale down the road. We just don't have to worry about any of those things at this point in the process because it doesn't have any liens.
Yeah, exactly. So what I did is I just took some of these properties that we'll go look at. This first one here ended up opening at 3,300 and sold for 13,500, and we'll look a little into it.
Yeah, it looked like it was, what did it say it was, 1.87 acres, it had a full address.
Yeah, it's on 1.3 acres, and it sold for 13.5. Now, we don't have a street view with this, but one thing the county did is they provided us some information, plus we actually have some old photos of it as well.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why it's always worth looking at the property valuation sites like Zillow and Redfin, because if the property's been sold and listed before, we can have additional images here of it. It can tell us that information. We can oftentimes see when it was last listed or when the photos are from, so we can get some idea of their age. But we can always learn a lot when we find the properties like this on Zillow or Redfin.
Yeah, now the county did provide a photo for it from 2024, so we can see what it looked like a couple of years ago. Now, when I looked it up on Redfin, I didn't pull up any value, but I did find this property here, that sold back in 2021 for 123. They're valuing it at about 180. So I think if you were to fix this property up, it would, probably worth 120, 130,000 because it's very similar to this one.
Yeah, a lot of times comps can tell us more than anything with these properties, especially when we know where the property is located at. We can see what the nearby properties are selling for and what they're valued at. Yeah, these are some interesting properties, really.
Yeah, now this one actually didn't get a bid on it. We can see it's a 2-acre lot, and we'll actually look it up here so you guys can see it. And there was actually quite a few that didn't get any bids, and so these are the properties that are going to end up going to the judicial sale.
It's kind of crazy to think about, though, that properties don't get bids, in a lot of these sales, and these can be good pieces of property. They can be good investments. They're just not getting bids because there's not a large number of investors that are trying to buy from that initial upset sale.
Yeah, exactly. So here we can see that 2-acre lot. Looks like it's right between homes, a bunch of homes within the area. So it's
that's a nice piece of property there between a couple of homes, and it probably has pretty good value. I mean, certainly I wouldn't turn it away. It's looks like it's big enough and it's in a nice area, and it doesn't look like it has anything too crazy in terms of topographical issues. It's just uncleared.
Yeah, I mean, it goes down a little bit, but this whole area does. So, kind of homes are building up on it, but a nice good 2-acre parcel that nobody even bidded on. Here's what Redfin has it valued at, 27,000.
What was it opening up for?
It opened up for 1,800.
That might be why, is the opening bid was just a little bit higher. If the opening bid was under $1,000, maybe it would have got a bid. It's just high enough there that somebody didn't quite put it in, but it doesn't mean it's a bad deal at that. That's still a pretty low price for that property, which we can see is valued at closer to 30,000.
Yeah, it kind of seemed like it was valued between 30 to 35. Now this next one here ended up opening for 5,400. It sold for 18,000. In fact, this is one of the more they paid more for it. You can see it's this property right here, and there does need some work on it. But one thing I kind of found interested here, you can see from 2023, is somebody was in the process of doing a rehab on it.
Yeah, those are vinyl windows that have been updated on the upper part, but not on the lower parts here just yet. So some of the windows have been replaced, but not all of the windows. But we can see it's kind of a crazy entryway into the house, like a
Yeah, yeah. In fact, you can
narrow
see
walkway there.
it's been neglected. I was kind of surprised, but the homes in this area are valued pretty high. They have this at about 157. I think if it was rehabbed and all done, it could be worth, maybe 180 to 200. Have to look into it a little more. But I did find it interesting because people were willing to pay up for this, and there might be reasons why. It would be interesting to even look in to see if you can find out what kind of rehab was done on it.
Yeah, I mean, the property itself, the roof, I mean, in this image, the shingles aren't great, but it doesn't look like it's leaking water here yet. It looks like it's probably still being lived in, and essentially, it's probably a property that somebody was either building on their own or took a while to build. Because it looks like it's kind of one of those things where they didn't finish up a few of the last things like siding the windows.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely needs to be finished. You'd have to see when it was last being lived in. Now this one here was opening up at 1,700 and didn't get any bid. And it's not the greatest house or anything, but I kind of, $1,700 house that didn't get a bid.
Yeah, that seems really cheap. I mean, it looks like so I guess the image is a little bit old. We'd need a newer image here of it, but yeah, it looks like a decent little house for that kind of money.
Yeah, yeah, for $1,700, they only have the Zillow value at the Redfin value at 44,000. I saw some similar ones that were selling between 50 to 60,000. So, you do have to make sure that there's going to be some room for you to flip it and profit, at $1,700. But it is interesting that homes like this that come on the market, kind of looking at the rental, it could be $750 to $1,000 a month. So they're moving enough property in here. If you pick this up for $1,700, change the locks, cleaned it out, maybe you're into it at $5,000. Could you turn around and sell it for 15 or 20, maybe 25? I think it's possible.
Yeah, you could probably sell it pretty quickly, at that kind of a price point, just because there's only so many places people can, only so many places that you can move into, or a house, for that kind of a price point. It's just really cheap.
Yeah, now this one ended up getting picked up for just the opening bid amount. We'll try to kind of go through some of these a little bit quicker because there's some better ones I'm looking down here at the list. And it needs some work, but still picked up for what, 4,500 or whatever.
Well, and it kind of looks like it's been lived in pretty recently, or if it was being lived in here at the time, that the image
Yeah,
was taken.
yeah, I think it was being lived in at the time. So they were still living in. I mean, obviously, it needs new paint. It needs probably a lot of things, and it's not a very high valued house, but still getting picked up for the opening bid amount. Same as this one here.
Yeah, that's a pretty nice looking property, really.
It's from back in 1999, so a little bit older image. Valued around 50. A lot of these they kind of have valued a little bit lower, which was kind of a little bit of a shock to me. But then when I'm going through and I looked at the sold prices, in some of these, the cheapest sold homes that have sold for 25,000, and there were some that were in pretty rough shape. So I
Yeah.
think, you could, even though they need some work, I think you could flip them and still make a pretty good profit on it if there wasn't a bunch of liens on it.
Yeah, especially the prices we're seeing here. These are the kinds of prices that you wouldn't have to do anything to the property. You could probably just turn around and sell them as is and be profitable with them.
Yeah, yeah, with a lot of them, I think that might be the strategy. Now, this one here didn't get a bid, started at 85,000, and we'll look a little into this one.
How many acres did it say included there?
15.75.
That's right. So it looks like it has a full address plus 15 acres. So maybe it's something like a farmhouse or something with.
It's actually a mobile home park.
Oh, interesting.
So we'll pull it up here while it's pulling
It's a
up.
pretty big mobile home park.
Yeah, so they've taken out a bunch of these. and I was looking up the information. I don't know if they had a problem with water or if it was a different mobile home park. I didn't have enough time to get into it more. But if we look at the county images, there was a lot more mobile homes all throughout this area. And obviously it got sold at the tax sale, so something was happening. But it's all of this area and comes back here. In fact, we'll look here, give you a better idea.
I wonder if they have all the, you can see, yeah, look at all the mobile homes that were there. They must have the hookups for all of that.
Yeah, that was kind of my thinking, and you'd have to look and see what kind of issues are on it. I did find some type of lawsuit or judgment or something like that. And so you need to look into it. Maybe the reason it didn't get a bid, but still you're looking at a mobile home park for 80 grand that's coming up that you might be able to really turn into, a really good opportunity. Plus, look at all that extra land that, is available where you could bring in a whole nother row in here and really fill up that entire park, because at one time there was people willing to live there.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how it's cleared out there in the back.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, it's interesting that they pulled it up here, and this isn't really even including any of that information. They're just kind of including just, one of the houses or one of the main houses on it. Here's a sign, Woodhaven South. That that website is no longer available. This is one of the structures there on the property. But I did kind of think it was interesting, didn't get any bids.
Those are images from 2024, so there's still mobile homes there.
Yeah, well, you can see something happened to that one. So, obviously there needed issues, but if there is any people here, they may love to have it redone. And the fact that it's already been zoned as a mobile home park,
Yeah, that's half the battle.
yeah, I mean, even if you had to spend a couple $100,000 into making sure that you pay off back stuff and then go through and maybe you have to put another couple of $100,000 in, let's say you're into it $500,000 by the time you're done, but you've got that all set up with 30 or 40 new spaces, all, you might get a lot of people that want to be able to move to there and put their mobile home on your park.
Yeah, it could be a pretty good long-term investment. Mobile home parks certainly have a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, or you could buy all your own mobile homes and rent them all out.
Yeah, you could have your home park that you basically own all of the properties for, and you could rent them out and make a killing on it.
Yeah. Look at this one here. Ended up selling for 7,000. Opening.
Oh, that's
bid
actually a
again.
good question. On that last one, are the mobile homes, would they be considered personal property or would they be considered
Personal property? In fact, most of those mobile homes, I bet there's a whole bunch of mobile homes on this list, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of those mobile homes could be even in that park.
Interesting.
Because they're all sold as personal property, especially if it's in a mobile home park. So if it's not included as real property in the county assessment, then it's going to be taxed as personal property. And since this is in a park, these are going to be personal property. But I wouldn't be surprised if you could have bought some of the mobile homes in that park on this list.
Yeah, they probably are there.
Yeah. So this next one sold for the opening bid amount. You can't get a street view of it, but we do have some photos of it. And it's currently under contract for 230,000. Picked up for the opening bid at.
Holy cow! They bought it for 7,000 and sold it for 230.
Yeah, well, it's under consignment.
It's under contract, but yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so this would to me was kind of the home run of the deal. You'd have to look more into it and see what was involved, but they're definitely able to get some money out of it.
Yeah, I mean that's as good a deal as you can get anywhere in the country.
Well, and you can see that they still have the old wallpaper.
Yeah,
so
it hasn't been. It doesn't. Maybe it's original.
I don't know. I mean, they definitely cleaned it up. You can see how they cleaned out the basement.
Yeah, I mean it is. It's in good shape. The furnace and the furnace and water heater look like they're newer. The house is all cleaned up and ready for sale. That's awesome.
But, you know, if you're looking at this photo from 2019, yeah, sure, that's a few years ago, but it was in pretty good condition then, you know, in 2019. So I wouldn't be surprised if when they got into it, it was in pretty good condition.
Yeah, especially for the price they paid. My goodness, they got it for under 5% of value.
Yeah, awesome deal. You know, here's another one that sold for the opening bid amount for 3,800. It's just this little house right here.
It looks pretty nice too. Certainly being lived in, you know, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, even throughout all the years there, you know, there's consistent living there, and you can actually see that the property, the windows have been updated and stuff on the roofs has been updated. That's a house that's been updated.
yeah, yeah. For $3,800, I mean, you can't get much better, even though it's not highly valued. There still could be a good rental income, especially if it's or just a property you turn around and flip.
It's going to be $700 to $1,000 a month, probably, you know, at least. And so it's the kind of thing you could pay it. You could have it paid off within 6 months. That's crazy.
Yeah, this one ended up selling for 2,800. We can't see the street view on it, but we were able to see some photos. This one's from 2019. This one was back in 1999, valued around 67,000. So you'd have to look more into it, but it was picked up for $2,800 and valued at 67.
Yeah, and a lot of these upset sales are about to begin again. In terms of time wise, it seems like we're getting into that time of year.
Yeah, yeah, they're going to start here. You know, some of them are going to be a little bit near the end of summer, but they can have some throughout. And plus, we'll be looking at judicial sales. You know, we'll try looking at, well, this one didn't even get a bid. Valued at 75,000. But it's on 1.45 acres. And it's kind of interesting, you know, at 3,400. We'll just look at one or two more and then we'll go. And you could do the same thing in a lot of counties. I mean, this is, you know, not one of the biggest counties, but it's still kind of interesting. You know, this one had quite a bit of land on it. You can see it, you know, included all of this and then came all the way over to here.
Yeah, it looks like it's grass.
Yeah, so, you know, obviously this house isn't in the best shape, but there was people living there back in 2024. You know, we've got kind of a photo of it valued at 75,000, but also you're looking at all of this grass here and then this over here, and then this one property back here ended up selling for like 2,500. So if you did want to build, you know, I did notice that there was some big houses out within this area, not necessarily right here, but kind of within the area, and that's quite a bit of land, you know, that didn't even get a bid on it. And we'll just look at this last one. So this one went from 3,500, ended up selling for 11. And we didn't get any information on, I can see it's out here, a cabin area, but all of these properties up here are pretty high valued. So,
That's
you know,
weird. Look at that weird picture.
yeah, right there. It's kind of the overhead view. See how there's kind of a,
Yeah, they've got a different season there for part of the photo.
yeah. But I was able to get some, you know, some of the county photos on, so you can kind of see it's a little cabin out there, valued at 128 and picked up for about 11 grand.
Yeah, that's a crazy deal too. Under 10% of value, you know, is what they paid for it. Anytime you can pay that low of a price, your options are just endless. They could turn around and sell that property, you know, for half of its value, probably pretty fast.
Yeah. In fact, we'll look at this last one real quick and then I'll flip it to you. This one's ended up selling for the opening bid. You know, it's this property right here. And it was kind of interesting that, you know, they had a 95, but you can see it was off market. So I think that this guy might have had it on the market after he picked it up at the tax sale. And he's taken it off the market. Maybe he's fixing it up now. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, that
but
is interesting though.
ended up selling for $5,000. He was asking 95,000 when he initially asked it. So at least that gives you guys kind of an idea of the upset sale and what's available there within Pennsylvania. I'll go